The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and something vaguely sweet, a smell Daniel Cross couldn't identify, but which filled him with an inexplicable sense of unease. He lay on a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, where fluorescent lights cast a flat, deathly white light. His head was wrapped in bandages, and his left arm was hooked up to an IV dripping a clear liquid. 3 days ago, he woke up in this same room, unable to remember anything from the last 3 years of his life. Doctors attributed it to retrograde amnesia, caused by a head injury from a car accident. His car had skidded off the road in the rain and crashed into a tree. It was a miracle he survived, they said. But Daniel didn't feel lucky. A knock on the door interrupted his dark thoughts. A woman in her mid-30s, with short dark hair and tired eyes, entered the room. She was dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans, with a pistol holstered on her belt. The police badge on her chest gleamed in the hospital light. "Hi, Dan," she said, sitting down on a chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" Daniel studied her face, trying to find any memories, but his memory was blank. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember you," he admitted honestly. The woman nodded in understanding. "I'm Sarah Wayne, a Chicago police detective. We were partners for 3 years before you quit and became a private investigator." "A private detective?" Daniel frowned. "Why did I leave the police?" Sarah paused to answer, as if choosing her words. "You said you were tired of bureaucracy. You wanted to work for yourself, to do things that really matter to you." Something in her tone told Daniel that she wasn't telling the whole truth, but he didn't press her. His head was already pounding from trying to remember anything. "What cases have I been working on?" he asked. "Missing people, mostly." "You specialized in difficult cases that the police couldn't solve." Sarah pulled a business card out of her pocket and placed it on the nightstand. "This is your card. Your office is downtown." Daniel took the card and read, "Daniel Cross, private investigator, specializing in missing persons." Below the name was an address and phone number, but they meant nothing to him. "Sarah," he looked at her carefully, "can you tell me about the last case I worked on?" The detective hesitated again. "You've been very secretive lately, not sharing details of your investigations. All I know is that you were looking for a few missing people, but the details," she shrugged. "You said it was confidential." After Sarah left, Daniel lay for a long time, trying to piece together the fragments of his life. Doctors said his memory might return gradually, but they gave no guarantees. He might forever remain a man without a past. A week later, Daniel was discharged from the hospital and returned to his apartment, a small dwelling on the second floor of an old building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The apartment was furnished minimally: a couch, a coffee table, and bookshelves filled with crime science literature and detective manuals. Maps of Chicago hung on the walls, with locations marked with pins, apparently places related to his work. In the bedroom, he found a safe that opened with a fingerprint. Inside were documents, photographs, and a thick folder labeled "Active Cases." Daniel opened the folder and saw photographs of several people with brief descriptions. Thomas Holloway, 28, missing March 15th. Jennifer Cole, 31, missing February 8. Marcus Reed, 35, missing January 22nd. They were all about the same age, all had disappeared in the last 2 months. But what connected them, Daniel couldn't figure out. The next day, his first client since the accident came. Margaret Holloway was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair pulled back into a neat bun and eyes red from crying. She clutched a photograph of a young man with a kind face and bright blue eyes. "Mr. Cross," she began in a trembling voice, "I don't know if you remember me, but I came to see you a month ago about my son Thomas." Daniel nodded, even though he didn't remember her. "Tell me everything from the beginning, Mrs. Holloway." The woman took a deep breath. Thomas disappeared 6 weeks ago. He worked as an accountant in a small firm, lived alone, but he came to my house for lunch every Sunday. He never missed our meetings. Never. Her voice wavered. The police say he ran away from debt, but that's not true. Thomas had no debts. He was responsible, reliable. What debts did the police think he had? They found records of large loans on his computer, but I know my son. He would never go into debt without telling me. We were very close after his father died. Daniel studied the photograph of Thomas. The face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Mrs. Holloway, I must be honest with you. Because of the accident, I have lost my memory of the last 3 years. I do not remember our previous meeting, and I do not remember the details of your son's case. The woman turned pale. But, will you help me find him? Please, you are my last hope. Daniel looked at the desperation in her eyes and nodded. I will do my best. Daniel spent the next few days researching the Thomas Holloway case. He visited the young man's apartment, a neat dwelling with a minimum of personal belongings. The police had already searched the apartment, but Daniel hoped to find something they had missed. In the bedroom, behind a bookshelf, he found a small cache of documents. Among them was a note written in Thomas's hand. If anything happens to me, contact DK. He knows the truth about the Tabula Rasa Project. DK, Daniel Cross. Thomas knew him and trusted him enough to leave this note as a last resort. But what is the Tabula Rasa Project? Daniel searched his office, hoping to find any references to this project, but to no avail. Either he had stored the information elsewhere, or had deliberately destroyed it before the accident. On the 4th day of searching, Sarah called him with disturbing news. Dan, we've found a body. Male, approximately 30 years old, found in an abandoned warehouse. On the south side. Is this Thomas? I don't know. The victim had all of his documents removed, his fingerprints burned with acid, his teeth knocked out. Complete liquidation of his personality. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. I'm coming to you. The warehouse was in an industrial area where most of the buildings were empty. The body was discovered by workers who came to dismantle equipment. The crime scene was cordoned off, and forensic experts photographed every inch. Daniel walked over to Sarah, who was standing next to the body covered with a white sheet. Can I see it? Sarah nodded and pulled back the sheet. Daniel saw a man of medium build with dark hair. His face was distorted, but the general features suggested it could be Thomas Holloway. The victim's hands were mangled, the fingertips burned to the bone, the nails torn out. Someone really didn't want us to identify the victim, Sarah noted. Daniel was examining the body closely when he noticed something on the wrist, a small tattoo that the killer had missed. The date R3ER15-2021 and the initials DC, his heart skipped a beat. March 15th, 2021. That was the date of his accident. And the initials DC, Daniel Cross. Sarah, he pointed to the tattoo. Do you see this? The detective leaned closer. That's weird. Why does the victim have a tattoo of your initials and the date of your accident? Daniel didn't know what to say. His mind was filled with troubling thoughts. Why would a dead man have a tattoo associated with him? It couldn't be a coincidence. That evening, when he returned home, he searched the apartment thoroughly, looking for any clues that might explain the connection between him and the victim. In a desk drawer, he found a notebook with notes in his handwriting that he did not remember. The notes were encrypted with a simple substitution cipher, which he somehow remembered despite his amnesia. After deciphering a few pages, he read, Project Tabula Rasa is an operation to create pure personalities. Clients require a complete erasure of the past. Elizabeth has developed the procedure. The first tests are successful. Elizabeth. The name didn't bring back any memories, but somehow it seemed important. Further in the notes, T.H. agreed to the procedure. His gambling debts make him an ideal candidate. The family must not know the truth. T.H. Thomas Holloway. But what is the procedure, and why shouldn't his family know the truth? The last entry, dated the day before the accident, was particularly disturbing. The situation is getting out of control. Elizabeth is becoming too ambitious. The clients are not volunteers. The project needs to be stopped, but she threatens to expose herself. The only way out is to erase her own memory. The procedure is scheduled for tomorrow. Daniel put the notebook down with trembling hands. So he planned to erase his own memory. But why? And what kind of procedures were carried out on the clients? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Sarah. Dan, we have a problem. We found a second body. Where? In the same area, in an abandoned house 3 blocks from the warehouse. Same picture. No documents, destroyed fingerprints, knocked out teeth. I'm on my way. Dan. Sarah's voice became serious. There's one more thing. The second victim had your business card in his pocket. Daniel felt the ground slipping out from under his feet. My business card? Yes, dated a week before your accident. Dan, I need to ask you some questions. Officially. He knew what that tone meant. Sarah was beginning to suspect him of involvement in the murders. I'll be there in half an hour, he said, and hung up. Daniel sat on the couch trying to process what was happening. 2 bodies, both bearing signs of professional character assassination. One had his initials tattooed on his head, the other his business card. His own notes suggested some kind of identity-erasing project. Was he really a murderer? Did amnesia erase not only memories of his normal life, but also memories of the crimes he committed? He stood up and walked over to the mirror in the hallway. In the reflection he saw a stranger, a man with tired eyes and a scar on his forehead, from a recent accident. Who was this man? A detective who saved people or a killer who destroyed them? Daniel returned to the living room and opened the safe again. At the bottom was a small box he hadn't noticed before. Inside was a set of surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, syringes. Everything had been carefully cleaned, but on one of the scalpels he noticed a tiny stain that looked like dried blood. His hands began to shake. Why would a private detective need surgical instruments, and why couldn't he remember how he got them? The phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. Hello? Daniel. A woman's voice, soft but with a metallic edge. I heard about your accident. How's your memory? Who is this? Don't you remember anything at all? This is Elizabeth, Dr. Elizabeth Rain. Elizabeth. Name from his notes. What do you want? Meet. Talk. We have a lot in common, and your memory loss creates certain problems. What problems? Not on the phone. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the Blue Note Cafe on Michigan Avenue. And Daniel, don't try to remember too much. Some memories are best left buried. The connection was interrupted. Daniel stared at his phone, feeling anxiety turn to panic. Who was Dr. Rain? And why was she warning him not to bring up the past? He returned to the notebook with his notes, trying to find more information about Elizabeth, but most of the pages were encrypted with a more complex code that he could not decipher. One thing was clear. His past was connected to something dark and dangerous, and now that past was returning, bringing death and destruction with it. Daniel looked at his watch. There was an hour left before he was to meet the police. He had to decide. Should he tell Sarah about his suspicions or try to figure it out on his own? If he really was the killer, confessing would mean the end of his freedom. But if he was innocent, keeping silent could cost the lives of others. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Whatever the truth about his past was, he had to know it. Even if that truth destroyed him, even if it turns out to be worse than he could have imagined. It was starting to rain outside, just like the night of his accident. Daniel turned up the collar of his jacket and stepped into the darkness, unsure what lay ahead, redemption or final ruin. But he knew one thing for sure. The game was just beginning, and at stake was not only his life, but also the lives of everyone who was connected to the mysterious Tabula Rasa Project, a project that turned people into nameless ghosts, erasing their past and possibly their future. The police station at midnight resembled a hive in which half the bees had died of fatigue, and the rest continued to do their work mechanically. Fluorescent lights flickered over rows of worn desks, creating a ghostly light in which the detectives' faces looked like masks of wax. Daniel Cross sat in interrogation room number 3, looking at his reflection in Giselle's mirror, where he knew Sarah Vane was watching. The room was standard fare for such places. Bare walls the color of a hospital room, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a camera in the corner near the ceiling, its red eye watching his every move without blinking. Daniel studied his hands, lying on the table. Long fingers, neatly trimmed nails, a small scar on the knuckle of his index finger. Where that came from, he couldn't remember. These hands could save lives or take them. He wasn't sure of the difference anymore. The door opened, and Sarah walked in. She looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes, a rumpled shirt, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She was holding a thick folder and 2 cups of coffee from the machine. "Sorry for the delay," she said, setting one of the glasses in front of Daniel. "Had to wait for the results of the analysis." Daniel took the coffee, feeling the hot liquid burn his fingers through the thin plastic. The pain was real, tangible, unlike his memories. "Sarah, before we begin, I need to tell you something." She raised her hand, stopping him. "Dan, I need to read you your rights. Do you understand that you are here as a suspect?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Suspect. Of murder, of people he might have known but didn't remember. "I understand." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out the crime scene photographs, black and white pictures that made the death seem even more brutal and senseless. Second victim, Jennifer Cole, age 31. Found yesterday in an abandoned house on the south side. Same picture. Destroyed fingerprints, missing teeth. No identification. She placed a photo of a business card in a plastic bag in front of him. Yours was in her pocket. Dated March 10th, 5 days before your accident. Daniel studied the card. It looked just like the one he had at home, but he didn't remember giving it to Jennifer Cole. "Sarah, I found some notes in my house about something called Project Tabula Rasa. I think it has something to do with the murders." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What records?" Daniel told her about the notebook, the encrypted notes, the surgical instruments in the safe. With each word, Sarah's face grew darker. "Are you saying that you found surgical instruments in your home that you don't remember acquiring?" "Yes. And one of them had what looked like blood on it." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "Dan, I need to ask you a direct question. Do you think you could have killed these people?" The question hung in the air like the sword of Damocles. Daniel was silent for a long time, trying to find an honest answer. "I don't know. I don't remember the last 3 years of my life. Maybe I became someone else during that time. Someone I don't even recognize. But you don't feel like a killer. And how should a killer feel, Sarah? Like a monster? Or like an ordinary person who simply does what he thinks is necessary?" She looked at him for a long moment as if trying to see in his face the answers to the questions that tormented her. "Tell me about this Elizabeth Rain." "She called me today. Said we knew each other, that my memory loss was causing problems. Wanted to meet tomorrow." "Are you coming?" "Yes. This is the only way to find out the truth." Sarah closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Dan, I've known you for years. You were a good cop, an honest man. But people change. Sometimes, dramatically. What do you mean? In the last months before you left the police, you became different, withdrawn, secretive. You stopped sharing information about your cases, avoided colleagues, and then suddenly you submitted a resignation letter. Daniel tried to imagine himself as Sarah had described him, but his memory was blank. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Because I hoped that your amnesia was a chance to start over, to become the person you once were. She paused. But now, I'm not sure that's possible. The interview continued for another hour. Sarah asked questions about his daily routine, his clients, possible motives for the murders. Daniel answered honestly, admitting that he did not remember anything that could shed light on the case. By the time they finished, it was 3 a.m. Sarah walked him to the exit of the station. Dan, I can't arrest you. There's not enough evidence yet. But don't leave town. And be careful when you meet this Elizabeth. Do you think she's dangerous? I think that everyone connected to your past is potentially dangerous, including yourself. Daniel returned home as the sky in the east began to lighten. He couldn't sleep, so he sat down at his computer and began researching the name Elizabeth Rain. An internet search yielded several results. Dr. Elizabeth Rain, neurosurgeon, memory specialist, author of several scientific papers on selective memory erasure. One article in particular caught his attention: therapeutic application of targeted amnesia in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. It described experimental procedures for removing traumatic memories in patients with severe mental disorders. Daniel read the article twice, trying to understand the connection between Dr. Rain's scientific research and the Tabula Rasa Project. If memory erasing technology existed, it could be used not only for healing, but for darker purposes as well. He returned to his notebook and tried to decipher the remaining notes. Slowly, the picture began to emerge. The Tabula Rasa Project was an operation to create people with no past, blank slates that could be used for various purposes. The notes mentioned clients who needed new personalities and procedures that made this possible. But the most disturbing discovery was waiting for him at the end of the notebook. On the last page, written in his own handwriting, but which he did not remember, was a diagram of the human brain with the areas responsible for memory labeled. Next to the diagram were detailed instructions for performing a neurosurgical operation. Daniel wasn't a doctor, but the diagram was so detailed that he could visualize every step of the procedure. Someone had taught him. Someone had turned a private detective into a surgeon who could erase people's memories. The phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. Sarah. Dan, we have a third body. His heart skipped a beat. Where? Industrial area, abandoned factory. Same picture. But this time there's something else. What? We found medical instruments next to the body, surgical ones, exactly the same as you described. Daniel felt the world around him begin to crumble. I'm on my way. No, Dan. You stay home. This is a crime scene and you are a suspect. Sarah. Sorry, but this is not up for discussion. The connection was lost. Daniel sat in the silence of his apartment, aware of the noose tightening around his neck. 3 bodies, all connected to him, surgical instruments at the crime scene, identical to those in his safe. He stood up and walked over to the safe. When he opened it, he discovered that the box of tools was gone. Someone had been in his apartment and taken them while he was at the police station, but who had access to his home, and why expose him in such an obvious way? Daniel returned to his computer and delved deeper into Dr. Rain's work. In one of her earlier articles, he found a reference to her work with law enforcement in a witness protection program. Memory erasing technology was used to create new identities for people under threat. But what if this technology fell into the wrong hands? What if someone used it not to protect witnesses, but to create perfect perpetrators of crimes? People with no past who could not be identified. The thought was terrifying but logical. Thomas Holloway, Jennifer Cole, and the third victim could all be products of this project. People whose personalities had been erased and replaced with new ones, and then someone started killing them, destroying traces of the experiment. Daniel glanced at his watch. He had a few hours left before his meeting with Dr. Rain. He had to prepare for a conversation that could change everything. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a gun, a standard-issue Glock 19 that was registered in his name, according to the paperwork. The gun felt familiar in his hand, as if he'd held it 1,000 times. Muscle memory remained, despite the amnesia. Daniel checked the magazine. Full, 15 rounds. He couldn't remember the last time he fired, but his fingers automatically performed the necessary checks. Who was he during those lost 3 years? A detective? A killer? Or something in between? The phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. Hello? Daniel. It's Elizabeth again. I heard about the third body. The police are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. What do you know about these murders? More than you can imagine, and less than you would like. Let's meet earlier. In an hour, in the same cafe. Why earlier? Because we don't have much time. Someone is destroying all traces of the project, and you and I are next on the list. The connection was lost, leaving Daniel alone with his troubling thoughts. If Dr. Rain was telling the truth, then they were both in danger. But could she be trusted? He hid the gun under his jacket and headed for the door. Answers were waiting for him at the Blue Note Cafe, in conversation with a woman who knew his past better than he did. A past that was perhaps so dark that it was best forgotten forever. The Blue Note Cafe was located downtown, in an old building, with high ceilings and large windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. At midday, it was usually full of office workers heading to lunch, but today there were few customers, perhaps because of the rain that had been falling all morning. Daniel chose a table in the corner, with a good view of the entire hall and the exits, a habit that had persisted despite his memory loss. He ordered coffee and waited. Dr. Elizabeth Rain arrived promptly. A woman in her 40s, with short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore a formal business suit, but moved with the caution of someone accustomed to danger. Daniel. She sat down across from him, still wearing her coat. You look better than I expected after the accident. Dr. Rain, or do you prefer Elizabeth? Elizabeth. We were close colleagues. Something in her tone told Daniel that their relationship went beyond simple collaboration. Tell me about the Tabula Rasa Project. Elizabeth looked around to make sure no one was listening. This was my development. Technology of selective memory erasure to create new personalities. Initially, the project was intended to help victims of severe trauma and witnesses in need of protection. What went wrong? You went wrong, Daniel. You saw possibilities in technology that I never even thought of. Daniel felt a chill in his chest. What are the possibilities? Creating perfect performers, people with no past who couldn't be tracked or identified. You suggested selling this service to criminal organizations. The words hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just a killer, he was a trafficker in human beings. And you agreed? Not at first. But you were persuasive. You talked about the money we could make, about the possibilities of helping people start new lives. And then, Elizabeth looked away. Then I realized that we had created a monster. Our clients were not volunteers. They were kidnapped, their memories erased and sold as nameless contractors for the dirtiest jobs. Thomas Holloway, Jennifer Cole, were they our victims? Yes, and dozens of others. We turned them into living ghosts, people without a past or a future. Daniel felt sick. He wasn't just a murderer. He was the creator of a system that destroyed human souls. Why are they being killed now? Because someone is covering their tracks. destroying everyone who could connect us to the project. Who? Elizabeth hesitated. I think you are. What? Your amnesia is not the result of the accident, Daniel. It is the result of a procedure you performed on yourself. You erased your own memory of the project and then proceeded to kill all witnesses. The world around Daniel spun. Did he erase his own memory? But why? Why would I do that? Because the project was exposed. The FBI has launched an investigation. The only way to avoid punishment is to erase all evidence, including your own memories. But if I don't remember crimes, then how can I kill people? Elizabeth pulled out a small device that looked like a remote control from her bag. Because I left a trigger in your brain, a code sequence that activates repressed memories and turns you into a killer. Daniel stared at the device in horror. Are you controlling me? I did, but I don't want to anymore. The project has gone too far. She placed the device on the table between them. I want this to end, Daniel. I want to destroy the trigger and let you live a normal life. And what in return? Help me find who's ordering the murders. Someone is using our project for their own purposes. Someone who knows about the trigger and can activate it without my knowledge. Daniel stared at the device, knowing that he held the key to his past and future. If Elizabeth was telling the truth, he was a puppet in someone else's hands, a killer against his will. But could she be trusted? Or was this just another lie in the chain of deception that was his life? What do you want me to do? Allow me to activate the trigger under controlled conditions. Recover your memories of the project. Only then will we be able to understand who is behind the murders. What if I can't control myself? What if I become a killer forever? Elizabeth looked into his eyes with an expression that might have been regret or calculation. Then I will be forced to stop you, at any cost. Daniel picked up the device. It was warm from Elizabeth's touch, and he felt a strange tingling in his fingers as if the device were alive. Where are we going to do this? I have a private clinic. It's safe there. Daniel nodded, making a decision that could be his last. He had to find out the truth about himself, even if that truth destroyed him. Even if it turns him into the monster he may have always been. They left the cafe in the rain, which grew heavier, as if the sky were crying for the sins they were about to reveal. Dr. Rain's private clinic was in the basement of a medical center on Chicago's North Side, a neighborhood where questions were not asked and money spoke louder than conscience. Daniel walked down the metal stairs, feeling each step bring him closer to a truth that might be worse than any lie. The room was sterile white walls, white ceiling, white medical equipment arranged with surgical precision. In the center of the room stood a chair, more like an electric chair than a piece of medical equipment. It was wired to a complex apparatus with monitors and switches. Sit down, Elizabeth gestured to a chair as she put on a white coat. The procedure will take about an hour. Daniel sank slowly into the chair, feeling the cool leather of the upholstery cling to his back through the thin fabric of his shirt. Elizabeth began attaching electrodes to his temples, her fingers surprisingly warm in the cold. What exactly are you going to do? Activate suppressed neural pathways. Your memories aren't gone, Daniel. They're just locked away, like files on a computer you can't access. She turned on the monitors and the screens came to life, showing the wavy lines of his brain activity. What if I can't go back? What if these memories consume me? Elizabeth stopped, her hand hovering over the control panel. Then the person you became after the accident will die, and the one you were before will return. Murderer. Yes. The killer. She pressed the first button and Daniel felt a slight tingling in his temples. The waves on the monitors became more active, as if his brain was waking up from a long sleep. Let's start simple, Elizabeth said, her voice sounding distant. Remember when we first met? At first, nothing. Then a flash. A hospital corridor, the smell of antiseptic. A woman in a white coat explaining something about a revolutionary procedure. Her eyes were still blue, but then there was hope in them, not fatigue. "I remember," Daniel whispered. "You talked about helping people forget trauma. Okay, let's move on." The second button. A stronger tingling, almost pain, and new memories flooding in. Laboratory. The first patient is a war veteran with severe PTSD. The procedure was a success. The man forgot about the nightmares that had haunted him for years. The joy on Elizabeth's face. Her kiss in the dark corridor of the clinic. Plans for the future, dreams of helping thousands of people. "We were lovers," Daniel said. And it wasn't a question. "Yes, I thought I loved you." Third button. The pain became stronger, but the memories flowed clearer. The first offer from a criminal client. A man in an expensive suit, offering huge amounts of money to create a clean performer. Daniel convinces Elizabeth to agree, just once for an experiment. The money will allow the research to be expanded to help more people. The first victim is a homeless man who no one will look for. Erasing his memory, creating a new identity, selling him to a criminal group as the perfect killer with no past. "Oh, my God," Daniel felt sick. "We've turned a man into a weapon." "You did," Elizabeth corrected. "I merely provided the technology." The fourth button. The pain became unbearable. But Daniel could no longer stop. The memories consumed him like a drug. The operation expands. Dozens of victims. Kidnappings disguised as disappearances. Thomas Holloway is not a homeless man, but an ordinary accountant who was chosen at random. Jennifer Cole is a nurse who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The procedures became increasingly brutal. Not just memory erasure, but physical changes. Plastic surgery, fingerprint changes, even tooth extractions to replace them with new ones. Completely transforming a person into someone else. "We were monsters," Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You were a monster. I was just a tool." Fifth button, the last one. Memories came flooding back, and Daniel saw the truth. In all its horrific fullness, Elizabeth was not an innocent victim of his manipulations. She was an equal partner, enjoying the power over the human mind. Moreover, it was she who suggested selling services not only to criminal groups, but also to government agencies, corporations, anyone who was ready to pay for clean performers. It was Elizabeth who developed the trigger system, a way to control the killers they created from a distance. It was she who suggested that Daniel himself be erased when the FBI began investigating. But the most terrible discovery awaited at the end. Daniel saw himself in this same chair 3 months ago, preparing to undergo the memory erasure procedure. But not to avoid punishment, but because he had learned the truth about Elizabeth. She didn't just sell the assassins they created. She used them to eliminate competitors, witnesses, anyone who could interfere with her plans. And when Daniel tried to stop her, she decided to turn him into one of her puppets. The memory erasure procedure wasn't his idea. It was her revenge for betraying him. "Do you remember now?" Elizabeth asked, and there was no regret in her voice. Daniel opened his eyes and saw her face, cold, calculating, devoid of humanity. In her hands was a gun, aimed at his chest. "Yes," he said. "I remember everything, including you killing Sarah." Elizabeth smiled. "Detective Wayne came too close to the truth, just like you did." "Why are you killing our victims? Thomas, Jennifer, the others?" "Because they started remembering. The memory erasure procedure isn't perfect. Memories can come back in fragments over time." Thomas Holloway had already gone to a psychiatrist, complaining of strange dreams. Jennifer Cole had started asking questions about her past. Daniel tried to get up, but found himself chained to the chair with metal bracelets. "You planned this from the beginning." Of course, your amnesia was a temporary measure. I restored your memory so that you could help me find all the remaining victims. And now that the list is complete..." She raised the gun. "Now you are no longer needed." At that moment, Daniel remembered one last detail. Before the memory erasure procedure, he had managed to send a message, not to Sarah but to her partner, Detective Marcus Jones. A message with the address of the clinic and a request to come if something happened to him. The sound of sirens outside confirmed his hopes. "You called the police." Elizabeth's face twisted in rage. "3 months ago, I knew you would try to kill me." Elizabeth pointed the gun at his head. "Then we will die together." The clinic door exploded and SWAT burst in. Elizabeth turned around and Daniel took the opportunity to knock over a chair. A bullet missed his head, hitting a monitor. The gunfight lasted a few seconds. When the smoke cleared, Elizabeth was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, her blue eyes staring at the ceiling, seeing nothing. Detective Jones freed Daniel from the bracelets. "We got your message 3 months ago, but we didn't know what to do with it. Until the killing started." Daniel sat in the wreckage of his past life, feeling a strange emptiness. He remembered everything, every crime, every victim, every moment of his fall into darkness. But the knowledge brought no relief. "What now?" he asked Jones. "Now you answer for your crimes. All of them." Daniel nodded. He didn't expect mercy, and he didn't ask for it. The trial lasted 3 months. Daniel testified against everyone connected to the Tabula Rasa Project, criminal clients, corrupt officials, everyone who bought their products. His cooperation with the investigation allowed him to save several victims who were still alive and bring dozens of criminals to justice. But this did not change his own fate. The sentence was harsh, life without parole. Daniel accepted it without emotion. He knew he deserved much worse. In his prison cell, he spent his days writing down the memories of each victim of the Tabula Rasa Project. Their names, their stories, their lives that never happened. It was his penance to remember those he had turned into nameless ghosts. Sometimes relatives of the victims came to him. Not all of them. Many could not forgive. But some wanted to understand how their loved ones spent the last days of their real lives. Margaret Holloway came a year after the trial. She was older, grayer, but there was no hatred in her eyes, only endless weariness. "Tell me about my son," she asked. "The real Thomas, not the one you made him out to be." Daniel told her everything he remembered, about how Thomas had resisted the procedure, how he had asked to go home to his mother, how he had cried when he realized his old life would be erased forever. When he finished, Margaret was silent for a long time. "Thank you," she said at last. "Now I know he has not forgotten me to the very end." After she left, Daniel sat in his cell, staring at the wall where he had written the names of all the victims. 43 people whose lives he had ruined. 43 souls he had reduced to empty shells. The amnesia had been a gift, he realized now. 3 months of life without the burden of those memories, without the knowledge of who he really was. 3 months of the illusion that he could be a good person. But illusions do not last forever. And now he had to live the rest of his life with a full understanding of his sins. Daniel picked up a pen and added another name to the list on the wall, his own. Because the man he had been before the Tabula Rasa Project was dead too, killed by his own greed and ambition. There was someone else in the cell now, not Daniel Cross, the private detective, or the nameless killer with no past. Just a man who remembered everything and had to live with it for the rest of his days. The guard's footsteps could be heard in the hallway, calling for all clear. Daniel lay down on the narrow cot and closed his eyes, knowing that his dreams would bring him the faces of all his victims, and it was fair, because oblivion was a luxury he no longer deserved. Tabula Rasa is a clean slate. But some sins cannot be erased. They can only be remembered day after day, year after year, until death, and Daniel Cross will remember.